Undertaker recently made some very interesting comments about Bayley. In this video, I'm going to tell you what he had to say and why they're so important, because when The Undertaker speaks, you best be listening. The Undertaker, decade after decade, year after year, opponent after opponent, town after town, The Undertaker has done it all in the pro wrestling business. And so when he sees talent in someone, when he sees potential in someone, I think everyone should pay attention. Now, The Undertaker, over the years, he had to put up with Vince McMahon's BS, and he's seen the evolution of the business, which ironically leads us to today's video, because The Undertaker was, and still is to a certain degree, an old school guy. He will be the first to admit that it's a little troublesome for him to talk about the business openly in public. Even though he has a smashing hit with his 6 Feet Under podcast, despite the fact that he does his One Dead Man shows across the world, it's still troublesome for him. And then you have Bayley, who is on top of the world in terms of being the women's champion on SmackDown. Her rise has been well documented on this channel, and I really wanted to focus on The Undertaker for a minute. If you think about it, seeing the progression of the business is almost similar to the progression in women's wrestling. As time has gone on, things have opened up even more. There has never been more access behind the scenes in WWE than there is today. And just like times changed when The Undertaker first broke into the business, the women's evolution and revolution and progression since then has also followed in the same footsteps, if you will, right? Because Bayley was one of the key parts of the evolution. She was part of, alongside Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch and Mercedes Moné and Emma and Saraya, aka Paige, and Natalia, and all these women that have brought women's wrestling to the dance. You have to give each and every one of them credit, just like The Undertaker recently did in an interview. Now, The Undertaker, if you look at what he's been able to do in this business, it's always been tied to knowing when the right move needed to be made. Bayley also in that similar way, right? Because she had her lovable teenage-esque character in NXT and early on her main roster run, and then she transitioned into a heel, completely changed her look, and then turned to babyface earlier this year when she was aligned, after she was aligned with Damage Control after they kicked her out of the group. So, this is what The Undertaker had to say on his 6 Feet Under podcast in terms of the depth of the women's roster. Rhea Ripley, he started out with, said she's really coming into her own. She's obviously had a nice year. I think she's only scratched the surface of how good she's going to be. In the women's division, you got Jade Cargill before he went on and praised Charlotte Flair, who's currently out with an injury. Rhea is also out with an injury. In regards to Bayley, he said she kind of got stuck in a slot for a while. A lot of times when that happens, sometimes people kind of give up and they kind of end up and be content with the mid-card range. I was really happy for Bayley to get her flowers at WrestleMania and show that there's a lot of gas left in the tank there. He added the women's division is deep, so a few different things. Obviously, this is a Bayley video. Bayley winning the women's Royal Rumble match, going on and challenging Io Sky for the women's championship at WrestleMania 40 and walking out with the championship. That was a big, big moment for Bayley, right? Despite all the success in which she has earned in her WWE tenure, despite all of the championships that she's won, the opponents that she's wrestled, the main events in which she has been part of, it always seemed like Bayley never got her WrestleMania moment, which is kind of sad if you think about it, right? Mick Foley, he didn't get his WrestleMania moment for years, and finally he did in that brutal hardcore / street fight, if you will, match with Edge at WrestleMania 22. And so Bayley, year in, year out, put in the work, put in the grind, put in the miles, put on the tears and the blood and the sweat and the effort. She never got that moment. Ironically, though, she did get that moment. Ironically, she got it just a few years after she was legitimately the host. Do you remember the year? 2021 WrestleMania 37, where she was co-host with Titus O'Neil and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania. She did that little segment with the Bella Twins. You remember that? Oh, how we have come so far. And so you finally get her moment, and it's like, yes, she got her flowers. The way that they built up to that moment, I think you have to give WWE a lot of credit, right? Because you had it where she won the Women's Royal Rumble match. She was kicked out of Damage Control, a faction in which she put together, a faction in which she had pitched for years. She wanted WWE to do it for years, and she finally got the moment, right? She had the Dakota Kais, and she had the Kairi Sanes, and she had the Io Skys with her, and the Asukas. Women in which she shared the ring with before the faction, and women that she had never stepped foot inside of the Squared Circle with. Talent that she thought could thrive in WWE. You have to give her credit for bringing back Kairi Sane. You have to give her credit for bringing back Io Sky, who is going to be leaving the company before returning. They brought back Dakota Kai, who had been released by the company, right? Yes, Triple H had to sign off on this, but also Bayley had to push for it. Now, she has talked about how she pushed for this faction while Vince McMahon was still in charge of WWE, but he didn't believe in the idea. He didn't see the same vision that Bayley did. And clearly, just like a lot of things, Vince McMahon was wrong. Now, I understand that Vince and The Undertaker, well, they go back quite a ways. And The Undertaker, even after everything that had, before everything had come out, he was spotted in public with Vince. Now, since the allegations, the horrific allegations that Vince has faced, The Undertaker has stayed clear of him, and probably for the best, considering the allegations that he has faced. But The Undertaker and Bayley, despite being men and women, despite the fact that there's a huge age gap, despite the fact that their tenure in the wrestling business spans decades, they're a lot similar than they are opposite. And I think that makes for an interesting dynamic.